In this form we call body, there resides God's light. When this form is no more, there will only be His light.
I want to live in a city where there are no spaces or places that I can't go.
Where we have diversity that's cherished.
We want a flourishing city. We want a welcoming city.
There will only be His light.
Shape note singing in England? Sufi chant? How will these have anything to do with one another? How could that be a bridge to something?
Why have borders? What does that do to people?
How do we physically and practically appreciate difference?
I would say all art is processed with people. The solid bits that get thrown off that process get turned into art that we see in art galleries on walls.
Suzanne really taught me that the connection of social and art was the most potent force possible to uncork what the creative mind can do.
It's a legacy not just in terms of the actual film, but that human connection of individuals' hearts and minds.
I still hear the conversations come up at the local stables. It's existing in a museum space, but still exists in the space that it was made to.
We're doing policy and research work, but expressing it through art.
There's something about Suzanne that's just fundamentally open to listening to people.
She really knows how to put other people forward and allow them to do what they do and give them that space and oxygen, but at the same time to put in the systems in place and to create timelines and pathways and structures that actually gets you to where you want to go. My real hope for this project is that the Whitworth and the Manchester Art Gallery are transformed into places that really have a central function in the city that people see, and in a way they're not institutions of individual expression but communal expression, and they become generally transformative for people in their lives.
What I really look for in a city is a community.
I'd like it to be a safe place where perhaps some of the young people get involved with making it safe.
Maybe if we could have a conversation and say something to the police without getting locked up, and they could say back to us, it will break down so many walls.
It should keep pace in every area and meeting the needs of every age group.
The process of change requires partnership.
There is power in unity.
There's some very strong relationships being developed.
It's all around using art as a tool.
I want to see this place being the real social educational institution it was designed to be.
Welcome our guest tonight. Warm welcome to Alistair Hudson, scientific and artistic chairman of
Vorstand, yeah.
or even director of ZKM since April 2023. And we are here tonight to talk about useful art and what a useful museum might be. That's the title of our tonight's Artefakte talk. Let's start with one of your last projects. It was with American artist Susan Lacey in the Whitworth Manchester Art Gallery in Manchester, and during and after the pandemic you asked the question, what kind of city and what kind of museum? Maybe you can explain a little bit to the audience what the project was about and what kind of city you want to make with this useful museum, inviting the people from Manchester City, the Mancunians.
Yeah, well, the project actually goes back to maybe 3 or 4 years ago when we did a conference in San Francisco at SF MoMA, actually. And they did a retrospective of Suzanne Lacey's work. Actually, it was the curator there, Rudolf Frieling, was formerly at ZKM many years ago, and he's now curator of media arts there at SF MoMA. And he did a very, what I would say, straight presentation of a historical retrospective of Suzanne's work. And we talked a lot then at the conference about how to make a Suzanne Lacey exhibition beyond the the usual formats, especially with an artist who is a social organizer, who is a feminist activist, and has very strong community roots and social motives beyond being a media artist. She has a very full career. And I basically wanted to collaborate with SF MoMA to make an exhibition, but I wanted the version that we did in Manchester to be different. I wanted it to be a version of the exhibition that was actually active in the city in order to show people actually what Suzanne Lacey does. The detritus that gets produced by her work is film and video and photographs and documentation and books and literature. But I really wanted to use her work to bring the work alive and to see if the work itself could help transform the museum in the way I wanted to transform the museum, which is to make the museum an active operator in the city itself, rather than being simply a place of spectatorship, which, there's a long story to that. We'll probably touch on that later on. So really, I said, well, rather than doing this retrospective, let's think about the exhibition as a manual, where we take maybe 3 key works from you, and we use those as an education in their own way to start new projects in the city, and to make projects that would really have an effect on residents, on policy, on decision-making, so that the museum itself became a place where you could enable change and use the power, the political power, the cultural power of the museum to affect people's lives in a very direct way. And essentially the 3 projects were a revisitation of Oakland projects, her project around media literacy in California in the 1990s, which we transformed into a new youth project in Manchester with gang culture. A project that she did in Ireland around borders and Brexit and the division between North and South Ireland to look at new invisible borders in the city, and a project around aging and really changing policy for older women in the city, and in fact, as it's turning out, for older women in the UK as a whole.
And maybe we should start with the definition what useful art is not. I would say useful art is not design.
No.
Useful art is not using art in a way, for example, using a Titian painting as porn or the Mona Lisa as ironing board, as Boris Groys once said. This is not useful art. Useful art, I would say, to start with a kind of a definition, is a way of experience and could only be done by artists. That's why we call it useful art. Is that correct? Or?
Partially correct.
So
well, useful art in English is a helpful term because it challenges a lot the presumptions around what art is, but it can also seem to some people instrumental. And so the term we also use a lot when I work with Tania Bergera is arte útil, in the Spanish, which is art as a tool. So the idea is to use art as a tool to get things done, to make social change or to enact something. And usually, and for the most part, when we're talking about arte útil, this comes from practice that is driven by artists. It doesn't come from government. It doesn't come from the established system. It's usually artists working in ways to imagine the world differently and then initiating projects that enable some kind of transformation. But I think all art is used in one way and another. This is something that is, we've not been told, certainly in traditional education. So I like to think less about whether something is useful or not, or whether something is art or not, but to think about to what degree is something useful, or to what degree is something art. And that is the reality, that some things are a little bit like art, Some people are a little bit like an artist without fully being an artist. So some things are useful to a certain degree to some people at certain moments, but useless to others at the same time as well. So it's a question really of re-understanding the world as a spectrum of possibilities, as art as a kind of process in time and space, rather than a thing that you say, is or isn't.
It's not an object that you put in a museum.
Yeah.
This is a special
Yeah.
kind of art. I think art was a long time useful as propaganda, for example, for the church, used for politics.
Exactly, in religion.
For the kingdom and all these things. Yeah.
Yeah.
So that's what we want. But Said, you coined the term useful art together with Tanya Bruguera? I think so.
Possibly.
Possibly.
But there's a prehistory to it as well. When we developed this idea of arte utile, useful art, we were conscious that it wasn't a new idea, and it was important to say this is not a new idea. Because when we did an exhibition at the Van Abbey Museum in 2012, 2013,
Confessions of
the Museum of Arte Utile, which initiated,
the museum, okay.
kind of initiated the project. And then suddenly we had an email from Pino Poggi in Italy, who said, "Hey, you stole my idea. I did arte utile in Italy in the 1960s." And then you had people like Eduardo Costa in America who were talking about useful art, where he was basically replacing street signs in New York that had gone missing with new street signs that were also art at the same time, or going back to John Ruskin.
And the result was that there's a network, a worldwide network of people, artists doing a kind of useful art. Or
Exactly. And the idea of art being in use, integrated in society, in daily life is not a new thing. It's a recent idea that art is not that.
Yeah. Okay, how shall we go on? We both prepared a slideshow for tonight. I was expecting Alistair to send me some images, so I won. I used mine. But in the end, we can switch if you don't like it, because I thought it might make sense to go far back in time till the point where we both met for the first time, and I think this is part of the history of useful art, of the evolution or the evolving of useful art, and this happened. I called it Lost in Translation. That was my feeling, a field trip. It started, I think, in 2004. When I was curating a show in the local Kunstverein called Face Off.
Oh yeah.
This was a reader, Face Off. It was an interview series with artists, famous artists and theorists, art historians on the body in the media, and out came this I think huge show in this tiny Kunstverein here in Pforzheim. It was a trick to interview them. Peter Weibel was part of it. Mike Kelly was part of it. I made an interview with him on the phone. Marcel Odenbach, Elisabeth Bront, Dietrich Drittichsen, all people whom I work with till today. And we had a performance with the new ballet director James Sutherland.
Yeah.
And his brother Adam came over to see his brother, to see the performance, and to see that show. And he invited me to come to Grijsdale. And I thought about it and said, okay, Grijsdale in the middle of nowhere in the Lake District in the north of England. It's near the Scottish border. And he said, yes, you should come over. And James said, yes, it's a very cool place, Hard Edge, famous artist. Ken Russell will be there, the filmmaker, director of Tommy Olaf Breuning, and it's a very inspiring place. And so I filled out my application form, and here's the journey started. So I flew to Manchester, and with the train arrived in Windermere, and was really lost. That's why I named it Lost in Translation. My field trip was a place.
You're making it very, very Harry Potter.
Harry Potter, mainly meadows, some cows, maybe sheep, a shattering silence, and yes, lots of tourists, lots of visitors, a region like let's say a Victorian theme park,
Yeah.
it looks like for me, and I think for you too, co-opted by the tourist industry. Yeah, their vision of what the Lake Trist should look like. And Adam picked me up in the night, brought me to Summerhill, not the school. Summerhill was a bed and breakfast. And when I got up in the morning, a huge dog was standing in front of my door. Jig, you remember Jig? Was standing, and someone was making a giant Cumberland sausage, preparing for breakfast. A snail of a sausage, and I said, who should eat this for breakfast, that giant sausage? And then a few people came in, you as well, and everybody picked a piece of that sausage, and then the day started. But to be honest, I was really lost and confused. Lawson Park is a farmhouse. Crystal Arts, the office was in the Forestry Commission. It was when Adam took it over, I think in the 1999.
99, yeah.
It was a sculpture trail. The residents came, had to do a painting or a sculpture, and that was put in the forest. Things like, I found this here. It's a wild pig, for example, or the Lake District is
That's
home.
what Grisdale means. Grisdale is Scandinavian for Valley of the Wild Boar.
Oh, really?
Yeah.
This is a wild boar, right. But this is from the former residents before Adam took it over. And of course, it's the home of Beatrix Potter. She's a famous storyteller. Yeah, you have illustrations of her most famous story is Peter Rabbit, but also she seems to be exploited by the tourist industry.
Yeah, especially with Japanese tourists.
Masses of plates. I brought with me, dare I say it, this is a tea cozy that Alistair sent to me, a Beatrix Potter tea cozy. I kept it till today. And yeah, that was a situation when Adam showed me, for example, the visitor center. We went to the Beatrix Potter Museum where this image was taken, a desperate art director of a tiny arts institution lost in this place. And there was a guy called John Ruskin who should save the day. Was John Ruskin, an art historian, I think one of the most famous living Victorians in the end of the 19th century.
Yeah, he was the first famous academic.
Yeah, like Alexander von Humboldt, for example. My first question is, why is such an, let's say, odd Victorian geek like John Ruskin so important for the history of useful art, and why was the whole philosophy of Grisdale based on his thinking?
Well, interestingly, Grisdale wasn't based on his thinking. We discovered Ruskin by accident.
Oh, really?
Yeah. So I think some of the images you show the Lake District, which is a national park, and it's one of the first tourist destinations in the world. It was invented in the middle of it as a product of the Industrial Revolution, when Britain was industrializing with its industry. It was a place where romantic artists went to escape.
Wordsworth,
Coleridge, Turner, John Ruskin. All these people went to go and work and live in the Lake District because it was this other. It was the ideal romantic. It was mountains and lakes. It's like a very polite version of the Alps, but it's also hugely popular, and it now gets 17 million tourists every year. Japanese, Chinese, German, Dutch, from all over the world, because of the landscape. But the landscape is completely constructed by the romantic ideal of artists. It was those artists who made people see the mountains and lakes in a different way, to see them as poetic, to see them as in the romantic tradition. And this created a version of tourism which was counter to industry. Ruskin was very instrumental in this, but also, as well as being a polymath, he was also against industrialization and the effects of it. He campaigned vociferously against what he saw industry was doing. He gave the first lecture on climate change in 1883, the storm cloud of the 19th century, where he sees the formation of clouds changing. He becomes an instigator of the environmental movement in the 1880s. Beatrix Potter was one of his disciples who actually created the National Trust.
Yep.
The National. So Ruskin is a person who is speaking out against society. And very interesting, when I was director of the two art museums in Manchester, and one of them, the Manchester Art Gallery, was originally, in 1857, John Ruskin gave a lecture called A Joy Forever on the Political Economy of Art, which was a lecture over 2 nights, 3 hours each, to like 2,000 people in the lecture theatre in the museum. And they thought he was going to talk about art. But what he did is he berated the industrialists, the merchants of the city and of the United Kingdom to say, you've done it all wrong. You have got art wrong. You treat it as something to show your wealth, your power, your prestige, your intellect, but it is not. Art is a process that humans use in daily life to make change happen. It is a way that we as humans see the world accurately in order to act ethically in it. And this essentially is this book on actually the lecture on political economy is his counter to Adam Smith, who was the voice of the new humanity of economy that was starting at that moment. And this is also the same city where Marx and Engels were recording the effects of industrialization on the working population. So Ruskin really was the voice not only who criticized industry and the effect it had on people's health, on their lives, and the way, but also he acted, and he created ideas and projects that were about actually making change happen, not just talking about it. So, for example, he set up his disciples, in effect, like in Jane Addams in Chicago, in Hull House in the 1880s, or the Toynbee Hall in London in the 1880s, created the first social housing projects, where people lived and worked together, but they also made art. Because for John Ruskin, the act of making and doing and crafting was essential to understanding how you control the world and shape it. And from making a small pot, or making a drawing of a tree, or by making lace or wood carving, you learn the skills to transform the world and the wider world beyond what's in front of you. And this is really, I think, the core of his thinking. It is about art as a process, which should be implemented in all aspects of society, in economy, in politics, in education, and so on.
But he was nearly forgotten in the mid of the 20th century.
Yeah,
Nobody knows him. Some know the modern painters. Some art historians know I did not know him. So,
yeah,
but he seems to be.
And we didn't know him either. So Lawson Park, the farm.
Yes, was a farmhouse for one of his gardeners, right?
Yeah, that's right. And we were doing all these projects where we said we'd run a artist residency program for years, where artists come and they do crazy stuff in the countryside to react against this weird environment, and they produce performances, film, video, art installations that get shown in New York, London, Shanghai, around the world. It was a production house for new art. But a lot of the local residents, at a certain point, I think when we did the Coniston Water Festival, it was like a crazy performance art community festival. I remember one of the local farmers coming up and saying, it's all very well us participating in these art projects, but when are you going to do something for us? When are you going to do something that actually matters for what we're interested in? And this was a turning point.
I'll come to it later.
And we started to say, okay, let's start doing projects that work for the local community, and that's when we discovered Ruskin on our doorstep.
When I had my residency in Greifswald, I remember we had these meetings with commissions set up were planning the water festival, the Coniston Water Festival. There's a lake, it's called the Coniston Lake, and it was a historical water festival, I think, goes back to the 50s of the 20th century or later?
Victorian.
To the Victorian times, okay. And it was a tourist attraction, I think, and you tried to change it and make it useful for the local people. But just one word to Ruskin. He was so important. He wrote a book called Unto This Last, his ethics against Adam Smith, as you said before, and it inspired many people.
Well, Unto This Last was the book made from the lecture.
Okay.
So the lecture, the 6-hour lecture, became 9 years later, became the book Unto This Last, which is the book that was the foundation text of the labour movement in the UK. It was the book that Gandhi was given at a railway station in South Africa and built his education and political system for post. You have a picture, yeah. And this is it. So Gandhi created an education system based on Ruskinian principles, where you learnt everything through agriculture, through growing, weaving, spinning, and dyeing. You learnt chemistry, biology, politics, economy, everything.
And I think also German socialists were inspired by Ruskin. I think was it Karl Liebknecht or August Bebel? I think
Rudolf Steiner.
Rudolf Steiner.
All his writing is based on
Tolstoy. A lot of people. Marcel Proust.
But also importantly, the arts and crafts movement comes out of Ruskin, and if you follow the lines, the arts and crafts movement becomes Bauhaus.
Yeah.
So it's an unwritten or unrecorded story for a large part of our culture.
And what were your first experiences when you started in Greifswald in the Lake District? You came 2004.
Yeah.
Before you have been part of the government's art collection. I think you lived in London.
Yeah. Well, before that, I worked in a commercial. I started my career in a commercial gallery, Anthony Goffe Gallery, which showed a lot of big-name German artists like Richter, Beuys, Kiefer, all the big names. In fact, I did have a photograph of Joseph Beuys in an Audi outside the gallery in 1988, which is very funny.
On your slideshow.
Yeah.
We'll have a look on it later. And
then I realized what I didn't want art to be, because we were basically making art to sell to museums and rich people as luxury goods. And I had a sort of socialist brain.
Or for the offices of politicians, that was the...
that was after that, then I worked for the government, which was about creating artworks and art projects in government buildings, embassies, consulates around the world. And that's when I worked with Liam Gillick on making a new building for the Home Office in London, which was when, again, that some of the seeds of utility were sown, because I realized you could affect politics by the building and environments you constructed around government and government thinking.
And what did you expect from being the deputy director of Greifswald? Why did you apply there? You have to leave London, I think. You wanted to get rid of this commercial stuff, I think.
And also, I'd spoken to Adam, and I thought I was looking for a project that would really take me away from this hegemony of contemporary art and look at the ways in which art could actually work in a broader way in the world. And I could see the seeds in Greifswald of a project which was about really thinking differently, about turning art on its head and taking philosophically, intellectually, approaching art from a very different place that was actually very exciting. Although a lot of people in London, they all said, "What, are you retiring? Age, whatever, 20-something. No, they said, are you going to go and, like your, what was it called? In those days, it was called, like slowing down or, but no, I'm going to do something really exciting, but in the mountains, a long way, in a village of 1,000 people.
Maybe you can show some of the projects that you did. So you stayed there for nearly
10 years.
10 years, the longest time you've been in an institution, I think.
Yeah.
And this was one of the projects. This is a farmhouse. You refurbished it. The bed and breakfast was sold, and with the money, I think you could refurbish this to a modern.
So this is it's a 12th century traditional farmhouse, repurposed as a cultural production centre for the 21st century. So it's actually one of Adam's other brothers, who's an architect, who redesigned the building to basically act as the residency centre. But it was also actually a working farm. And it wasn't something, no, you couldn't visit, because it was all about, it wasn't about looking, it was about doing. So when people said, in London or New York, oh, I must come to Grisdale and see Grisdale, I've heard so much about it. And you go, well, there's nothing to see. You just come and you see us working. And so it was a very different attitude to how you thought about art. So the farm, the farmhouse, the building, its interiors were all an art project. Everything was an art project. The gardens were an art project.
A view from the air.
Yeah.
But when I came there was no heating, I think. There was no phone connection. There was no internet. There was really nothing. You could even not write an email. Only from the Forestry Commission. There was the modem, and we had a connection.
Yeah. In fact, my first project there, we were doing an exhibition at PS1 MoMA in New York.
Romantic Detachment.
Romantic Detachment, but making projects for that show. And my first project was to do with a Welsh artist, Bedwyr Williams, was to do a comedy night in the local pub, linked via ISDN line to a bar in New York where they were also doing a comedy night. And it was one of the first. We actually had to get the engineers to come and install the ISDN line at the pub in the middle of this rural village on a dial-up connection. It was a total catastrophe.
And after 10 years, I think you look back. The book was published with a funny title, "Adding Complexity, Confusion." To confusion. I said I was confused. There was, of course, confusion there, and you just added complexity. I think it's a bit the beginnings of the art project, as I remember them, were a bit dysfunctional to the locals. Then there was a turning point. We have a close look in this, or a short look in this. This is a Coniston Water Festival that you organized for the local residents. Yeah, their water festival.
Yeah.
For example, there was a boat dressing competition. I remember discussions about a watercolor competition, which never get real. As in
no. But the point was, it was a traditional festival that had stopped because they were too busy working in the tourist industry to do anything for themselves, because it was basically their own entertainment. So we re-established the festival for them as a critique of tourism, and also as a way to get them to do things for themselves, or to try and encourage a culture of cultural production in their own community.
But it was also the turning point for your work till then. Here we see Adam and Roger Rabbit, Peter Rabbit, not Roger Rabbit.
Peter Rabbit, yeah.
Peter Rabbit. And I remember a lecture that you gave with the Kibbo Kift.
Yeah.
Parade, and that the locals came to you and said that they don't want to participate in these things, no longer want to participate in these things.
I can
that
understand.
Was a kind of turning point.
Yeah, I can understand. It was a performance by the artist Olivia Plender with Ken Russell, a filmmaker, about a radical scouting movement from the 1930s. And it was funny in contemporary art terms, and has been exhibited in many places now. It's been a successful project, but the locals didn't really see the point of it, and they wanted something else, which I could understand.
And from this point on, you tried to change everything. You started to work closer with the locals. You started a project that was called the Seven Samurai.
Yeah.
And you invited local farmers from Japan to come and to run a restaurant, I think a Bracken restaurant. Maybe you want to...
We were actually, the same year as the year after the festival, because we were interested in challenging tourism, we were invited, and this is this project, the Seven Samurai, we were invited to do a project for the Echiko Samari Triennial in the north of Japan, in the mountains. Very similar area to the Lake District, but where there was, they had Marina Abramovich doing projects, the Kabakovs doing projects, James Turrell, huge landscape projects to drive tourism to this mountain region. And they asked us to do a project, and we said, well, what about if we didn't do something large scale and spectacular, but we did something very specific with a community of farmers, local people, to do something for them? What would we do? So we sent it, and it was a kind of humorous critique itself of the Kurosawa film Seven Samurai, later made as The Magnificent Seven, if you like westerns, about one dying culture going to help another dying culture. And so the idea was we would take a group of 7 artists to go and be useful for a small village of farmers in the mountains of Japan, in what was then a hugely touristic region, but one of the most beautiful as well. And beautiful because it's where they grew the most delicate rice in Japan, very expensive rice. And they lived for over a month working with the farmers to try and find solutions for some of the problems they have. And one of the key ones was for them to be able to sell their rice direct to the public. This is before the fashion for farmers markets and all the kind of food culture we have now, hipster food culture. They used to sell their rice to the government collective. So basically the artists set up a system to sell rice online, digitally, around the world, and for them to maintain their community and to celebrate their culture. So this was a fascinating project. It was disowned by the triennial because they didn't understand it. But after the farmers complained to the triennial and said, we don't want any more of these big projects, we want projects like this that help us, they changed their mind and they promoted it. But the following year, we invited the 7 farmers who were all in their 70s. Their children weren't taking over the farms, they were old. We invited them back to Coniston to do a residency as artists in the Lake District. And their project was they ran a restaurant in the village, which was cooking bracken, ferns, which covers the mountains in the Lake District, but everybody thinks of it as being poisonous, because if you eat it fresh, it's poisonous. But in Japan, they have a way of treating the young shoots with ash, water, and wood ash, and this removes the toxins, and it's a very expensive delicacy in Japan, like asparagus. So they ran a restaurant in the village, serving this food, and we invited local chefs from Michelin-starred restaurants to come and learn the techniques, and people came and they ate, and suddenly people in the village went, okay, we get it, we understand. This is useful culture to us. We understand what we can learn from this. These are 2 different communities with similar problems from around the world, addressing culture and addressing the practicalities of living.
And farmers talking to farmers about agriculture.
And
what they knew, their sharing their knowledge. And then I think it was a time when the Coniston Institute was founded and that you started with the village table. Is that right? The village table is that you invited the local people for a weekly meal, I think, for exchange, and this was very, very successful.
And this is a project in Japanese artist who was teaching.
But this also not.
This is a Japanese artist teaching miso making.
And then you had another project. This one here in China,
similar project
with farmers. And then we went over with our master course, I think Silke, she's in the audience too, we went over to see what you were doing in Greiz to explain the theoretical background. We had discussions, but the most important thing was, I think, the practical work they did. The students, they had lessons to do, and one, for example, was to build a fence. To build a fence by the branches that lay on the ground. I think the problem was you had problems with the mountain bikers. Adam told me they're pissing into the bushes, and so they had to build a fence. And it was that's why I told before that it is a kind of an experience. Useful art is a kind of experience. I think it was one of the best design experiences they ever had. I think they were really happy and proud of what they did, and then they had to organize the village table. They had to cook and think about the design and learned a lot of practicing useful art or working with the locals.
And in the end, it's about learning to apply artistic competence to everything you do, whether it's preparing a meal, whether it's making a offence, whether it's writing an essay, no matter what it is, it's about applying artistic competence in these fields.
And then I think we leave the Lake District now. With the question, I prepared a lot of what kind of questions, so what kind of art, and with these experiences, you became the director of MIMA. But before we go to MIMA, I show some images from artists that you worked with. One is Jeremy Deller, and I think this image is symbolic for what kind of art you don't want. This art for the wealthy few, the museum art for the 1%, the art that is sold on art fairs. And this was a wall painting, not by Jeremy Deller, but he was doing the British Pavilion on the Venice Biennial, and it shows William Morris. You mentioned him before, the other founding father of the arts and crafts.
Well, he was a disciple of Ruskin.
So he was a disciple.
Everything William Morris did was based on his teaching.
I think he's thinking the yacht of Roman Abramovich, the oligarch, into the laguna of Venice. Jeremy is really important in the history of participatory art, participatory practice. I saw two projects. This is Jeremy. One of them was Acid Brass. You told me about this when we were on our way back in the train from an interview we did with Jeremy. Acid Brass. Do you want to explain what Acid Brass was?
Yeah, so this was in Britain. Every coal mine had. I think you probably have it here maybe in the Ruhr Valley here as well. But every coal mine has all these brass bands. They have their own brass band, and they're very traditional, and it's a very old-fashioned form of music. And he worked with one brass band from the Grimethorpe Colliery coal mine, and basically made a CD of the brass band playing acid house anthems.
His favorite ones, I think.
Yeah.
And it was really, really successful.
And the band went on a world tour with Jeremy, and they loved it.
Yes. He set them on speed. He set them on speed. They were really successful. Flew to Manchester, flew to London, played in big techno events for thousands of people. Till today, I looked it up. They are still going. Still on tour. That was one project, but
and it still happens. I was on Saturday. I was in Ettlingen for some festival happening, and there was a brass band playing Boney M. And I thought Jeremy Deller is responsible for this.
He invented this. Yes, I think so. It was in the 1990s.
Yeah.
And later, I think 2004. I think this is the icon of what participatory art is about. The epitome. It is called the Battle of Orgreave. It was a reenactment of a violent clash from the 80s. Coal miners against mounted policemen.
This is at the height of the politics of Margaret Thatcher. The Thatcher years, where she was trying to shut down industry and the unions and make Britain a new, service industry centre. Old industry is gone. So it was a war against industry, against new technology, effectively. But Jeremy, and there was actually in the middle of the miners' strike, there was a battle in the village of Orgreave between the miners, striking miners, and the police in riot gear. And Jeremy, also fascinated by traditional cultures, like battle reenactment societies. You have them here in Germany, where you might have...
Yes.
So he worked to reenact the Battle of Orgreave, but with the actual people involved. So it became a conversation around revisiting that history and what it meant to the people involved in it.
I think miners dressed as policemen, policemen dressed as miners. That was a kind of exchange. There's a famous claim that Margaret Thatcher said about society.
There's no such thing as society.
There's no such thing as society. And I think that was the beginning of the neoliberal era. This idea that there are only individuals, societies is not existing, and it's a society of the singularities, for example. That's a famous book title, a German one. And I think she was wrong. She was wrong till today, because there is something we have in common. We face the same problems. We
Yeah.
face, for example, the problem of climate change. We have artificial intelligence. We have had a pandemic. Yeah. So we can only solve these problems together. So
Yeah.
it's togetherness. It's society, and not a society of singularities. Yeah, where everyone is.
But nonetheless, in a way, the software, the operating system that Margaret Thatcher created is the one we're still living with now.
Yes.
This was
Exactly.
the switch
Exactly.
into kind of turbo-capitalism, and where we are now. Reagan, Thatcher, the new Europe, this is exactly the moment when the system we are now struggling with was created.
With massive influences on the art world, so that art is only for a few wealthy people, rich people. For the 1%, representing them, their kind of culture in the museum, for example.
Yeah. And in the UK we had Brit Art in the 1990s, Damien Hirst, people like this, which was and Jeremy.
He was part of it.
Well, Jeremy wasn't. No, Jeremy wasn't. Jeremy was aside from that because he was working in social contexts. He wasn't making pop art imagery. I mean, Jeremy never makes any money from his art. He makes a little bit now, but you know he gets it from these kinds of projects.
I said we both made an interview with him. Out came this one, the CD. What was astonishing is the title, and I was often read in interviews with you that you want to make the world a better place. And we asked him this question: do you want to make the world a better place? And he felt a bit ashamed, I think, and said, no, I want to make the world a more interesting place. This is his adding complexity to confusion. And most of the artists that I work with and talk with, Liam too, I think he's too dysfunctional to make the world a better place. Yeah? And he said to me in an interview that we did when we met in New York in September 2 years ago, he said, Alistair can do this. He is the only one who can do this. He can make the world a better place. And I think he's right.
I'm more of an optimist than those artists.
And then, we forgot Nicolas Bourriaud. Of course, Jeremy was one of the artists that was mentioned in this very important book by Nicolas Bourriaud from the 1990s called Relational Aesthetics. Liam was in it, I think Rickard was in it, other artists that are still famous till today, and also very complicated definition. I read this book to understand what I experienced in Grisdale, but it was not very helpful. I think the turning point, the shift that you explained, your work with the farmers, and that the local residents worked together, that was what really was going on in participatory art or practices. There's another book called Artificial Health. I think the title comes from André Breton.
And the cover this is Tanya Bruguera.
This is Tanya Bruguera.
Yeah.
It's a book by Claire Bishop. I think you worked with her in Grisdale too, and there were lots of explanations, definitions of what was going on. I think none of them is right.
Yeah.
Maybe socially oriented practices, things like that. But then came the point where you and Tanya, you mentioned her. This was a performance by her in Tate Modern.
Yeah.
Two mounted policemen on the back of the horses, performing crowd control techniques, I think.
Yes.
And it was about the experience of the audience, of the spectators. How do they feel controlled by these policemen, like in a demonstration or like in the Battle of Orgreave. Tanya is an artist that you work with till today. I think she will be in your new...
Yeah. She's coming to Karlsruhe
next year. Yes, the fellow traveler, so we talk about this later. But you together, I think, we talked about this before. You founded this Arte Utile movement, and it's a website, but it's also a network, a worldwide network of people thinking the same way or similar way in Italy, in America, and I think the most practical term is useful art. About what's going on at the moment. And next step for you was you became the director of a museum in Middlesbrough in the northeast of of England, the Middlesbrough Institute of Modern Art. Short form is MIMA for 4 years, and now you could bring in these experiences from Greisdale on a museum's level. But the problem was, I think MIMA was a place, you once called it a shiny, glossy temple of modern art, something like a little Guggenheim, in a place or in a city that was totally run down. Former steel industry. And
it's twinned with the Ruhr Valley, the region it's in. It's the steel producing, was the steel producing capital of England, and then the steelworks closed. So they tried to regenerate it, and of course, what you need to regenerate a city that's in decline, you need a museum designed by a Dutch architect that shows Gerhard Richter. That's the answer. But the locals didn't respond to it historically. It's not for us. And it was also the region that was the highest voting city in Brexit, for Brexit. So it was really was, and had the most migration problems, migrant workers, migrant housing, poverty, urban decline, and it was described many times as Britain's Detroit. And in the middle of it was this museum, contemporary art museum.
And the first show you did, I choose one of the shows, was exactly the opposite that people were expecting. I looked it up. That when you began there was a show with David Lynch announcing David Lynch show or other artists. And you did exactly the opposite. You made a show called Localism. Maybe you should talk about this a little bit, what this was. I have only two slides with it.
Well, it was, so what I wanted to do, basically, when I started as director of the museum there, there was an election for a new mayor. And one of the candidates for mayor was running a campaign to say if he got into power, he would close MIMA down. That it was disconnected from the people. It wasn't a culture that belonged in this part of the country. It was an alien invasion by this spaceship of modernity that had landed down. And from everything we've talked about, I wanted to see if we could transform a museum of modernity into a museum of a new way of thinking, a new way of working in its locality, but still being international and relevant and critically aware. And so really I thought, well, let's try some strategies here to, first of all, bring the local people on board. So I said, rather than doing an international blockbuster, so this is the antidote to the international blockbuster exhibition, is an exhibition where we crowdsource the history of art in Middlesbrough, where we say, art isn't something alien to you. You all have had art in the history of the city since it began. And we did a campaign in the local newspaper, on the radio, to invite people to make contributions to the exhibition, to an exhibition about the history of local art in this city. And all the curators were like, oh my God, no, they're going to bring shit. It's just going to be like the worst art, like local amateur artists. And I said, it doesn't matter. It doesn't, whatever they bring, we will make an exhibition out of what gets brought into the museum. And quite interestingly, people didn't, on the whole, bring their own art. They were actually very generous. And they said, oh, you should look at this artist from 1933 who lived down here. Oh, you should look at this project from the 1960s. And people really got behind the idea of telling their story, using the museum to tell a story of their culture. But then, of course, that culture also involved the roots and the branches of modernity and the connection of the city with wider movement. So if you see this furniture on the right, this was actually a local project we discovered where in the 1930s, a local wealthy family tried to set up a community for unemployed miners by bringing German soldiers from Germany and a designer trained at the Bauhaus to teach agriculture and furniture making in Middlesbrough, in this town in the northeast of England. And they taught miners how to make furniture based on Bauhaus designs and sold them in a department store in London, in John Lewis. Actually, we restarted this furniture making company with a young designer called Boosbeck Industries, and launched that in the museum, and actually then furnished the museum with this furniture made by unemployed people in the city. So the idea was that this exhibition of the history would be a catalyst for generating new projects that could then be made in the town, useful projects that, whether it was economy or industry or social strategies, it was about creating the museum as an engine room for transformation in the city.
Eating is very important to bring people together. You invented a kind of village table too, where people sat together and were planning new projects. And I remember that you once said that if you think of Joseph Beuys saying that everyone is an artist, you said, why don't you trust them? Why don't you trust people and what they value, what they would bring in? And for me, it looks like a perfect show on the history of modern art.
Yeah, and of course the irony was that it was a show of local art by local people, which is traditionally the anathema to high culture. Actually curatorially became a really well-known exhibition because of its curatorial approach.
And then came the next step, was non-artist winning one of the highest prize in the UK.
Yeah.
This is from The Guardian, the street that might win the Turner Prize. Of course, it's Assemble. We had them here for a talk too and for a workshop. And you've been on the board of the jury of the Turner Prize, and maybe you can give us some insights. Is it if you a member of the jury, can you, for example, propose artists? Everyone, and you propose them, or?
Yeah. So on the Turner Prize jury, essentially what happens is that there's a public nomination. Anybody can nominate artists. So when you're a jury member, you get a big list of artists, but you can also bring to the table artist proposals yourself, artist suggestions for artists. And there are 4 jury members and the chair, who's the director of Tate. And then you have endless discussions to get down to the shortlist. And I was very determined to try to see, in a mischievous way, could I get some kind of useful art on the Turner Prize jury list? And I thought the best example in the UK was Assemble, who are also not technically artists, but also not technically architects either. But they're people who apply art-like strategies in social projects.
And at that time, they were working on a project.
I nominated them for a project in Liverpool, in an area of these traditional old workers' houses, that in an area that was really in decline. The houses had holes in the roof. They were falling down like this, and Assemble were brought in by a local community group to try and save their neighborhood, because the city had given up. The city had said, no, let's demolish the neighborhood. And this one street said, no, we're going to hold on to our street and we're going to save it ourselves. We're going to rebuild our neighborhood ourselves. They invited Assemble in, and they started repurposing the dereliction and turning it into architecture and design. So, bits of old wood would be used to print textiles. Broken bricks would be used to make terrazzo, to make kitchen tops. And the houses would be reconstructed in ways that would apply a kind of design mentality to a collapsed house. So you might turn one terraced house into a communal winter garden. Or you might have, basically all the architecture of the house was made in an artful way. The same way, it's like making the fencing in Grisdale. Every detail of the houses was made by things lying on the ground in this neighborhood. And it was I mean, a really wonderful project actually as well. And they then made a shop of products.
Yeah.
So you can buy online. Not only did they refurbish the houses, but you can buy doorknobs, you can buy textiles, you can buy tables and chairs that they make in this community and order it online now.
I did buy all these things.
Yeah.
I did buy the knobs, the fabric, and the ceramics and all these things.
Yeah, so I nominated them for the Turner Prize, and then the other jury members said,
and this was the showroom?
Yeah, this was the exhibition of their products and design at the exhibition of the Turner Prize, and basically the long shot was, I think we had the longest jury meeting ever in the history of the Turner Prize, where I battled and battled and battled, and the other jury members saying, it's enough that they're just on the shortlist. And I said, no, they have to win. And it went on for hours.
And the art world was really angry about this decision.
Yeah,
because you cannot make money out of this.
Yeah, and that was it.
You cannot sell these things.
I heard a gallerist at the dinner, the awards dinner, saying, it's not art. You can't make money out of it. But it wasn't actually a shop. That was the irony of his statement. It was actually making money, but a different kind of money. And then I remember a gallerist actually coming up to me, jabbing me in the chest, and he said, "You've broken art." Yeah. He was furious.
And the interesting thing is, two of my colleagues, they saw them on TV. They saw Assemble on TV, and they came to me and said, "Robert, we must bring them over to Pforzheim, to the Artefakte Museum," which was really impossible. I mean, they won the Turner Prize, Harvard wanted them, Stockholm wanted them. That's why I showed the images with the master course. When we went to Greisdale, I wanted to ask Adam, what shall I do to bring them over? And he said, okay, let's do them a workshop. Not just a talk. We had not so much money to pay them. And in the end, Adam made it possible that they came over. This is Louis, this is Fran, and they came over, and we had a artefakte talk, a lecture from Greisdale Arts, preparing, I think, the project in Immer, the Fair Land project, and of course by Assemble. On the next day, we made a workshop with them. Again, it was about experiences that the students could make. So you see them here. This is Louis, this is Fran, it's me and Adam in the background. Very, very successful. We had another workshop with them, refurbishing a little bit the Café Roland, a student-run cafe not far from here. So this is how this idea of useful art went popular, or went pop. And then came next step in your career as a museum director. You took over the Whitworth, the Manchester Art Gallery, and that's why I said that was a point where the useful museum or useful art went pop. Because Manchester is a huge city, the heart of the Industrial Revolution, and this institution, the Whitworth Manchester Art Gallery, goes again back to the end of the 19th century. And I found out when I was researching about it, this is how it looks today, I found out this. I don't know if you can read this. I need my glasses to read this. But it's from a Science Museums group journal, and the first sentence is, the Whitworth has been making art useful since 1889. So
I wrote that.
You wrote that, really? Okay.
Well, I changed that as soon as I got there. I changed all the history.
Tricky.
So
that's tricky. You wrote that yourself.
But it's actually true.
It is.
It's true.
Yeah. You did a lot of research in the Manchester Art Galleries.
So I don't think you've got a picture of Manchester Art Gallery as well.
I don't think so.
So the Whitworth and are the two principal art museums in the city. And their origins is in the 19th century, in that industrial period I was talking about, when Ruskin was about. And they weren't art galleries. They were institutes of science and art combined. This was the prehistory of art museums and of museums in that culture. They were places of education for the workers. So you taught the workers. Manchester was a textile city, producing the world's #1 textile city. They wanted the workers to learn good design, so that they would produce better textiles and the industry would be more successful. And they wanted the workers to be enlightened and educated and to know art and science and geology and be good, healthy, well-rounded citizens. So the institutions were made to do that job. They weren't there, they were there as instrumental, useful institutions to transform society. And in fact, when I did the research for the Manchester Art Gallery, which is earlier, which is 1828, I looked at the design, the original architectural plans by Charles Barry, same architect who designed Houses of Parliament in London. And on the cover in Latin of his designs, it says, "Nothing beautiful unless useful." And then I said, right, okay, we're going to put that everywhere.
And also only one of the projects you did in the Whitworth Gallery, which is, I think, a little bit connected to the acid brass thing with the William Farrell brass band.
Yeah.
It was the Reno nightclub at the Whitworth. Yeah?
Yeah.
It was a famous nightclub? No, it was not a famous nightclub, it was a nightclub.
Yeah, so there you go. So the Whitworth is just slightly out of the city centre and in an area called Moss Side, which is all part of that Thatcher history as well. So in the 1980s, Britain's Afro-Caribbean communities rioted. Brixton, Toxteth and Liverpool, where the Assemble project was, and Moss Side here in Manchester, where these downtrodden mostly black communities were oppressed by the police. They were poor, they were disenfranchised, they had no agency. And they, in the end, in this Thatcherite Britain, they rioted. And they attacked the police, and they threw bricks. And the centre of this community was a nightclub called the Reno. And in a way, it was their culture centre. They couldn't go into nightclubs in Manchester because they were black and they would be turned away. So they made their own culture in this club, but it's also where they self-organized. A little bit like the institutes I described as well. It's where the working classes organized, but also made their culture. But after the riots, the city demolished the neighborhood, and they demolished the nightclub as an act of, you could argue it as cultural cleansing, but it was really an act of violence to clear the ground, and the site remained empty ever since. And then I was aware when I started at the Whitworth that there was a local history group that had an event one evening in the gallery to talk about their memories of this nightclub. And I said, this is a really classic case of museums doing it wrong. That these projects are always like an education project on the side. There's the main exhibition, which is glamorous and has all the budget, and there's a big dinner, it opens, and we do an e-flux about the opening, and it has an advert in Art Forum. But these projects that are super interesting always get pushed to the sidelines. I said, I want to do a project with them. I want to do what they are doing in the middle of the museum in one of the main galleries. So we set about a project with them, not only telling the oral history of this project, but working with the archaeology department of the university.
The digging project started, I think you engaged
and
a playwright.
This is Linda Brogan.
And you started to excavate these
they did an archaeological dig
artifacts from the club.
So like broken glasses, vinyl records, jeans, bags of drugs, ashtrays, the detritus from the ruins. Was extracted from the architectural dig, and then we showed that as an exhibition in the museum. But the point was, we also gave them the exhibition for a whole year, and we made them artists in residence, and they had complete control of what they showed. The curators had to work for them, not them working for the curators. And the principle was that they would use this to grow and collect more stories. So the exhibition grew and grew and grew over time, with people coming with their stories of the nightclub, of what life was like, of police oppression, of violence, of rape and bad education, to paint the whole story. And the principle was to allow this community, this disenfranchised community, to suddenly, where they had previously not been able to have a voice, to tell their story, to tell the true story of their culture, to allow them to speak and present it publicly at the biggest institution you could in the city, and to give them agency to speak to power. Yeah, that's some 1980s cans of Coke.
And again, it's the question, what kind of museum do you want? Who is represented in the museum? Which kind of culture do we represent in the museum in the future, for example? Is it only for one class? Is it representation of what the rich values, or is it for minorities too? Yeah, how do we represent all these cultures in the museum? I think this was a way to show how the museum handed over to this group could be useful. Yeah,
exactly.
And perfect example for useful art, I think.
And it's no longer, the point is, it's not asking local people, for example, to come and see things in the museum. No. It's the move from spectatorship to usership. Yes. So people understand that they can use the museum to their own ends.
Yes.
And that multiplicity of voices actually creates a much more dynamic and productive form of culture.
You coined a new term, I think it's museum, isn't it?
Yeah, it's a bit cheesy.
It's also by you. Museum, we come to this in the end of this. Yeah. But now then the next step was that you'd been announced chairman, scientific artistic chairman, director of ZKM, one of the biggest art institutions, one of the big five, I think. And since 2023, you are here. And you have plans. Let's talk about your plans a little bit. There was an evening. No, first you started to go back in history. We talked about this when I visited you for the first time in ZKM. And the history is that ZKM should be something like, you mentioned the Bauhaus before, the kind of electronic Bauhaus, the digital Bauhaus, as Peter Weibel puts it. And that's one of the visions you have, the combination of art and technology, art and sciences, to bring them back again in the kind of Renaissance 3.0 or whatever point it is. And that's one of the things you do. But you told me that you are planning a series of shows, or not really shows, exhibitions called the Fellow Travelers. And there was an evening I couldn't come, unfortunately I was in Italy. It was called Scene Change. You invited some of the artists, Tanya Borgera, was there online, and you showed what this new vision of ZKM might be. ZKM as a huge think tank of arts and sciences, but how you try to make it useful to face, I think, the global problems that we have. That is a kind of mission statement, I think. There. So we had performances, I found some images in the tradition of the Bauhaus.
This is the nod to the Bauhaus.
Yeah, it's connected to Oskar Schlemmer and the mechanical ballet. We had videos, and we had this. I saw this before, I think, in the Van Abbe Museum. A robot arm pouring tea into cups, and you spending.
Yeah, it's an adaptation of that project. So basically, this is one of the artists we're going to show next year is a Chinese artist called Zheng Gugu. Yeah. Who was actually part of the Yang Jiang group, who we worked with in Grisdale. But he's working in a way in what I identify as a new field. So if you look at where ZKM was operating and thinking with Peter and his conversations with Bruno Latour, it was about still addressing the state of the world and the relationship between art and technology, but essentially it was still that philosophical tradition, trying to get to grips with the world and understand it, and present that as the thesis. And the thesis is defined by that philosophical structure. What's happening now, and there are quite interesting writers around, like who also in traditions of Germany and media arts, but Chinese writer like Eikmeyer, who writes on art and cosmopolitics and so on as well, is really saying, but there are more perspectives here. There are more. We can't just allow a kind of a singularity of world understanding. We need this multiplicity of of different cosmoses, different cosmopolitics, all working, weaving a web, an omnidirectional, multi-directional web of human activity which is working towards somewhere else. And Zheng Gugu is an artist who kind of sits within this. He's basically building a city in the middle of the forest in Guangdong province based on the 1997 computer game Age of Empires. But it's also about, he talks about the shift from, which I think is very important, is the shift, he describes it, from semiotics to energetics. Mm-hmm. And what he's trying to do is basically redirect earth energies. So he's building these structures based on Age of Empires, but in the forest, intertwining with nature, with energetic systems of the world, and making tea. And so we've invited him to come and make a winter garden with a tea house of some sort. Not quite sure what yet next year. It's a kind of permanent feature within ZKM. But at this evening, we had a video of Zheng Gugu making tea, traditional method of making tea, of pu'er tea from his little city in China.
We'll bring my tea cozy.
There you go.
We have just put a tea cozy for this event.
And then we have a collective in Karlsruhe who works through ZKM called Robot Lab. And Robot Lab worked with one of these KUKA robots to try and copy Zheng Gugu making tea the Chinese way. But again, I did actually use the phrase lost in translation when I was giving them a brief, because this is in fact not, this is trying to make Chinese tea, but not with traditional tools, but with what they could find in IKEA in Karlsruhe, and a robot from KUKA Labs.
So in the end, before we open up the discussion to the audience, let's see what the concept of the fellow travelers is.
Well, there you are. It's there.
Yes, I found this on the on ZKM's website, and We Are All Fellow Travelers is a series of not exhibitions, it's interventions.
It's a way of working in the world, is the way I see it. And so Fellow Travelers opens in July next year. It's an exhibition, but also not an exhibition. Because if we look back at the history we've discussed tonight, the exhibition as a form is relatively new. It was created in the middle of the 19th century by the great exhibitions, principally, of capitalism, of this economic system that was created by industry. And it was really about control and power. It's connected with empire, it's connected with a spectator economy, it's connected with consumption. And you often find that with museums, they're on this endless cycle of production of exhibitions. Production, overproduction, beyond sense. They make so much stuff, so many things, so many books, so many catalogues, but to what end? So I wanted in a way to kind of think, okay, let's have a think about this. Yes, I still want to make exhibitions because I like exhibitions myself. I'm an art animal.
Me as well. Yeah.
But there are other delivery vehicles for art other than exhibitions. There have been for 40,000 years of human history. Art existed in the world for most of human history without exhibitions. It was operative in society. So could we start to think of different formats and ways in which we could work in ZKM, which is, theoretically, it's an experimental place. It is a laboratory. It is the digital Bauhaus. So what I want with Fellow Travelers is to basically set up one of the exhibition spaces, a series of laboratories and workshops with artists and people and communities from around the world who are using technology from the ground up to affect some kind of societal change, who are trying to make the world a better place. Some working, some misfiring, but the idea is you put these people together and that acts as the catalyst to generate new ideas for correspondences between Mexico City and Bangalore, between Karlsruhe and Berlin, or Lahore, or Lagos. Because what's happening now, and I was trying to think, well, if we're going to reimagine the digital Bauhaus that ZKM is supposed to be, what would it actually look like now? Would it still be a building in Germany? Or could it be this dispersed network of multi-directional network of people working to use, as Gropius says, on the unity of art and science, art and technology to imagine and make the world anew. So I kind of see the future of ZKM continuing this history, but really starting to expand it in many different directions and many different platforms and with many different geographies. And not just people joining in with what we're doing, but what we are doing is joining in with what other people are doing and trying to make. And so I see this really as a natural evolution, and it also connects with the history I talked about tonight, with the institutes. The institutions that were created by industry in the 19th century were also trying to do the same thing. And so I kind of, when I was invited to come to ZKM, I kind of did see it as a logical conclusion to the work I'd done before, which was struggling with how you make art matter and relevant in a society that is constantly industrializing, constantly going through technological revolution, and how you keep humans and ethics at the center of it.
So the era of autonomous art is over. What does it mean to my job? Will I lose my job? Is this the death of the curator? Is it? No. And what will your role be in this new vision of the museum? You don't name your director, but this was worked out by you. I think you brought in the ideas on the back of what we discussed of your
well, it ties in with this word fellow, which I find quite interesting as well. So I've talked for a long while about, in a way, a lot of the problems in our world have come about through the cult of leadership. And usually it's men, like me, who are leaders. And I think it's the redistribution of power that is really necessary in order to kind of rebalance the world a little bit. So I talk much more about fellowship as an antidote to leadership. And you could apply that in a museum setting, you could apply it in a political sense. But I think this is one of the things that is needed right now. So I kind of wanted this term fellowship to operate through the institution. So rather than necessarily me being the king at the top of the tree, it's really about me trying to orchestrate and work with the workers of the institution, artists, communities, networks, different constituencies, to make this institution work for the world. And for me, I see that as the job, rather than necessarily trying to be a figurehead, despite you making a really scary poster with my face on it.
Okay, I promise we will come to see what you will do in the future in that case. Am I open this discussion up to the audience? I think there are many questions. We have a microphone. I don't know where it is. No. I have it. Oh, it's lying here. Are there any questions on the useful museum? Jill, is this on? Can I give this to you? Okay, thank you. Not on.
Oh.
I think it works.
Hello.
Yeah. First of all, thank you for your speech. I found it very refreshing, but also very hopeful. How we can experience art in a completely new way. My question is about new ways, your new ideas you introduced in these institutions. How did you get the important people or the people who are giving the money and everything, how did you convince them to follow your path? Because you are really making refreshing ideas, and I don't think they allow a lot of compromise. And when you say as well, fellowship instead of dictatorship or leadership also had to do a lot with compromise. How did you overcome this friction?
Well, there's always friction in the process, because, especially in the art world, where there are a lot of forces trying to maintain the status quo. Contemporary art is a very conservative culture. And of course, there are always people who, when you have an established tradition, an established way of working, they don't want things to change because it works really well for them. But my argument was always, these are public institutions. They need to work for the widest number of people possible. They need to generally work for the public. And if we're really honest, we have to say that a lot of museum institutions traditionally have not done that. They make exhibitions for the art world, for their peers, for credibility. There's all kinds of motivations and reasons for making exhibitions, and it's not all bad. A lot of them are very good and tremendously interesting and educational, and so on and so forth. But for me, the argument, when it was dealing with politicians or with funders, was to say, we have to really allow these institutions to work democratically for the population. And usually the politicians get that. Politicians understand that, because usually they can see that actually not that many people go to the exhibitions, or it's a particular type of person that benefits most from the institution, and there are those that don't. And that there's also a role for art working in society which is to do with education, which is to do with quality of life, which is to do with the way we are in the world. So I think you can make the arguments, but I've also always delved into the history of an institution to justify that. So at Eikmeyer in Manchester, in Middlesbrough even, if you look at the original intention, when the people were coming together to set up an institution, it's usually not that far from this direction of travel. It's just that they become ossified in the traditions of the culture sector, or certainly in the kind of traditions of contemporary art. So yeah, it's kind of duality really of reminding people about public duty, but also reminding people about why these institutions were established and what they were trying to do. But you still get resistance, and you'll get resistance. There were people who came to the scene change thing a couple of weeks ago at Eikmeyer, and like, oh my God, what is this? I don't understand it. It's all change. We don't want to be a social institution. We don't, it's all about moralizing, or it's not art. It's always going to be like that.
Some more questions?
No, I've answered everything.
Maybe we wait a few seconds. Okay, seems that we said everything, explained everything, useful art, the concept
it's simple.
is clear.
It's simple.
That's the next question. I knew it.
Craftsmanship plays kind of a large role in the beginning of your thoughts, John Ruskin and William Morris. What role can play craftsmanship in the ZKM program today?
Well, as far as I see it, there's a lot of craftsmanship in ZKM. There are software engineers, hackers, coders, electronic engineers. The stuff it's full of tinkerers. If you kind of look behind the scenes, as I can, even within the team, and if you look at media arts restoration, if you look at the production of these technologies, I don't really see a discontinuity between crafting in wood and metal and stone in the arts and crafts movement, and crafting in chips and wires and CRT tubes and data, and now AI. For me, it's all part of one continuum, which is about making, and about making things, about transformation, of turning this into that, and to make something new that then has an application. So I definitely see it as craft. I see it as crafting. And in fact, I remember when in this Mechanics Institute in Coniston, this Ruskinian village hall, as well as teaching cookery, we did computer coding as crafting. And you got kids, and you watch people coding, it's like watching somebody knit. It's like watching somebody weave a tapestry. It's not that different to me. But then the important thing for me is the vital thing is about learning that practical way of transformation, of having that agency as a human to be in the world and turning something into something else. And you can apply that to like making a pot, right the way up to making a city, or making a country or industry. It's about learning that, and I think one of the challenges for somewhere like ZKM, which is quite interesting, is that the screen-based culture and the service industry culture that we have created, and now AI, is disconnecting people from the processes of making. Because things are getting made for them. We've all got phones, we don't know how they work. So there's a role for someone like ZKM to teach people how things are actually made, whether that's machine learning, or whether it's the, electronic circuitry, or software engineering as well. These are all things that are made, and it's important to be in a communal space learning how to make. And there was actually some research done during COVID about the way people who were operating purely in a digital space, i.e. they were sat at home doing Zoom meetings all day, that they'd lost that communal commons, physical communal commons. Even in a digital space, so that they recorded that there was a 30% decline in people's cognitive skills throughout that period because of that isolation of working in a singular dimension and not being in a space with other people. And that's not to be a Luddite. What this says is that actually the importance of people being together, even if they're working with the latest technology or biochemistry or whatever it is the importance of that cross-communication between people through the process of making is hugely important for human development and human well-being. So yeah, that's a kind of long answer to the but I definitely see it as a crafty place.
Thank you very much. Yes, another question.
Hi. It's on? Yeah. Okay. Hi. Thanks for the talk to the both of you. And I have a simple question, or maybe a complex question. I don't know. Do you think the ZKM is already a useful museum, or do you think it will be the useful museum? Yeah.
Yeah, I think it is. I think it is useful because people use it. It's useful already, and it's had its effect as well. In a way, ZKM was an institution that had a job to do. When it was created, it was part of the transformation of Baden-Württemberg to be the Silicon Valley of Germany. And having an institution like that was part of the package to transform the economy and the culture of this region. That's why it's for a city of 300,000 people, it's a ridiculously oversized cultural institution if you think about it. It's an institution that should be in a city of 5 million people, not 300,000. So it's played a central role in that, and it has acted as a catalyst for all kinds of things. It works as an education center, it works as a place that brings people together, it introduces new ideas. So yeah, of course, it has use and people use it. But like all these things, it could be more useful. And it could be used by a wider number of people. And it could be created more through different uses of the institution as well. And I think it's that diversity of operation that I think is also very important for cultural institutions now, that we don't necessarily just need to think about making exhibitions. That's part of it. But, you know, there's a music program, there's an education program, there's research and development. And all those things are actually part of what ZKM should be. If you look at the founding statements, there are kind of three principal areas of activity. One is teaching and education, one is research and development, and one is dissemination and putting things out into the world. So it's that kind of system, including the HFG, the Hochschule is part of that, it was designed as part of that system as well, is about creating new ideas and creating ways for technology and art to be synthesized with social development. And if you look at it, there's so much more an institution that size could be doing. Yeah.
So there will be...
Hello?
So there will be a change also?
Yeah, of course, yeah. And it has to, because when ZKM was created in 1989, and the world was a very different place then. No institution should stand still. It should adapt to the context and the circumstances it's in. You know, when media arts was a thing in the 1990s, for example, you needed media arts institutions to put a focus on that and to champion it and to make the case for it and to disseminate it. Now in 2023, everybody does media arts. I mean, I've just been in Berlin the last few days. Every exhibition I go to has got media arts in it. They don't describe it as media arts. Everybody's doing media arts on their phones or their laptops in daily life. Everybody is operating, it's the sea we're swimming in, is the sea of media. This is the world we're operating now. So the ZKM has to change. It can't be the center you go to experience media arts, because you're already experiencing it everywhere. So we have to think about adapting that to this new context and think about how best we can operate to make some kind of effect.
Okay, thank you.
Okay.
Yeah. Thank you very much for this wonderful evening. I enjoyed it very much. Thank you for your explanations, for the inspiring ideas that you gave us, and thank you for coming to us to the School of Design for the artefakte talks. Thank you very much.
Pleasure. Thank you.